A couple months ago, I did a review of a brush set from Tattoo Smart that was all about drawing girl heads, and today I'm doing a review of another brush set that they just came out with, all about painting, specifically for painting tattoo flash and watercolor, and it's called the Spitshade set. It's a really awesome, super versatile tool, and I'm gonna give you guys a bit of an overview. I'm gonna show a little bit of a demonstration as to how to use it, and then give some of my thoughts and input at the very end. If you have any comments about that, go ahead and leave them below, and I will take that into consideration, I guess. Before I get into it, I just wanted to give a little bit of background and overview as to what spit shading is and what tattoo flash is in general, if you're not familiar with it. If you're a digital artist, you're familiar with Procreate, but you're not really sure what this new tool is and what it does. It basically replicates the way a paintbrush with watercolor ink works on watercolor paper. And spit shading in particular is a technique that a lot of tattoo artists use when they're painting flash, and they basically use saliva, like spit, to get the right amount of consistency and moisture onto their brush for doing blends and things like that. So this tool replicates that pretty much perfectly. One thing that this set comes with besides just the brushes is it also comes with paper, and specifically tea-stained watercolor paper that's supposed to replicate the real thing. And it has a couple really cool features that I'm gonna go over at the very end that make it much more believable than just painting over a photograph or a scan of some watercolor paper. It kind of puts your painting in between some other layers that makes it a lot more believable. The first thing that you're gonna do is open up one of these papers, and I like the tea stain paper. It's an 8x10. It has a kind of a stained antique kind of look to it. And when you have this open, this will be your work surface. The layers are all preloaded, so you'll have one for your sketch, one for your color, one for your black, one for your lines. If you want to use some white, there's a layer for that. And those are all kind of sandwiched in between these top two layers and the paper base. Give you a quick brief overview of the set. It starts off with liners, specifically nibs, which are a calligraphy tool specifically used for inking on paper. There's a adjustable size round nib, which if you select that, you can come over here, adjust the exact diameter that you want. There's the extra small, the small, medium, large, XL, XXL. Out of all of these, for my personal preference, I've been using the medium nib. It's bold, but it's not too bold. If you like using varying line weights, you could use something a lot thicker and balance it out with some finer lines. But the versatility is there, and any combo that you really would want to do, you can. Underneath the nibs, you have a few different Sharpie replicas. This one replicates a brand new Sharpie. It has a very solid tip. I can go ahead and even show an example of the Sharpies. With the new Sharpie, you can see it's super crisp, it doesn't bleed a lot, and it still has some character. It still is somewhat pressure sensitive. You can kind of whip things out and get this gradient at the end, just like you would if you were drawing with a regular Sharpie. I'm gonna go ahead and take those off. The next one's a used Sharpie. It's one that's like broken in, has a little more character to it. It's not quite as defined, and it has this really neat, like irregular border on the edge. And that's something that is really, really cool about this entire set, is the subtle variations between liner to liner. Is you see this new Sharpie is super crisp. This one's a little bit more dull, and you can even take it to a dry Sharpie, which, you know, when your Sharpie's just running out of ink and you kind of have to push hard to get a line to come out, it replicates that same kind of feeling where less ink coming out, you can kind of build it up just as if you're using a Sharpie that's running out of ink. So I think the name is perfect: dry Sharpie, used Sharpie, and new Sharpie. There's a few below that called use this to paint, and then no, use this to paint, which is kind of clever. They're just different types of inking tools. They're pressure sensitive, and so you can start off with a really like fine corner, and then you can press and get a little bit more fill. And this is very similar to using watercolor on a page as well, because the first pass that you put down is somewhat transparent, and if you want to make it a little darker, you go over it a little bit more, and you can see those start to build up. You can see where it's overlapping. We can get a little darker and a little darker, which is awesome. I love that. There's one more inking option called Road Hard and Put Away Wet. It's just another variation of that. And then you have a couple ink runner, splotch machine. These are super loose. If you're trying to fill a large area, or you want to get something maybe almost texture, or you just want to make a mess on the page, you can get this ink runner, make it super large, and just kind of make a loose mess. If you push a little harder, it gets a little bit more. If you wanted to make like smoke or anything like that, you could lay down something like that. Splotch machine, very similar, little bit more controlled, but still really, really fun to mess around with. Below that, you have a couple of other options like spit and image, ink wash dark, ink wash medium, ink wash light, and extra light. Use this to paint. Nice field of some dark black, went over it a couple times. And then you come over to the smudge, and that's when you can grab the spit shader, or you can grab spit and image. Any of these down here are gonna be really good for that kind of blending. And you can either start in the black and kind of pull that out, or you can start in the paper and pull the black back, almost like an eraser. But either way, you can get a nice smooth gradient. It's also pretty pressure sensitive, so it feels a lot like painting with watercolor. Like they nailed it. I really, really enjoy this. The Magic Spit Shader is probably the one I use the most, and I'll blend out this other side. You can see it's a little bit more organic. You can make it a little bigger. Has a little bit more of a natural feel. This one's a little bit controlled. I don't know, I like this like kind of looser feeling side personally. Go ahead and get that erased. Underneath the spit shaders, you have a couple other tools that you could use kind of any way you want. There's some that are specifically made to be set to smudge, and they're specifically for blending, but you could really use any of these on either side. So you could ink with something like the spit shader, and you could blend with something else. You could smudge with a nib if you really wanted to, but you're not gonna get the same desired effect as if you're using the ones that are intended for inking and the ones that are intended for smudging or spit shading. So from here, I'm gonna go ahead and do a demonstration of a piece of flash. For this specific one, I'm going to just use a design from one of the other tools from Tattoo Smart, which is the Scott Sylvia brush set. There's a really cool design with a heart and some roses, which is pretty representative of his style. And I went ahead and dropped that right on the canvas there. You can see it's on its own layer, it's on the sketch layer. And what we're gonna do is go ahead and grab a nib, the medium nib, black selected. We'll go ahead and go in, start lining this. One thing that I really like to do, especially on something smooth like this, is get to the end and hold it, and it will smooth it out on its own. So you don't have to get super specific. You can get really, really smooth curves. If you just kind of generally follow a line and then hold for a second, it snaps. Get smooth. Go ahead and do that throughout the entire design. So now I'm on another layer. I'm gonna start kind of just building in some of the black. I'm gonna make this heart black. It seems appropriate for a Scott Sylvia design. Filling in this whole area, nice and full. Just like if you were painting with an actual paintbrush on actual paper. I'm leaving this little highlight at the edge. And what you can do then, once you have the ink laid down, or watercolor, or whatever medium it would be in real life, then you can come over to the smudge, Magic Spit Shader, got it. You can adjust your size, let's say about a quarter of the way, third of the way, and then you'll just go through and you can kind of blend out that edge. And it's kind of a bleeding look. The great thing about this is if you overdo something, you can bring it back. You can literally undo it, you know, because we're on an iPad, it's not on paper. If you were painting this on actual paper, there would be no undos, there would be no erasing, and that's the big difference here. So you could go through, paint all the black, which would leave you with something looking like this. I'm gonna turn off the sketch layer. So here we have all of the black put in. You can zoom in and see all these gradients that I did. I blended it out and left it kind of loose in a couple spots, you know? You want it to kind of feel like it's actually watercolor. You don't want to have it so rigid and digital and the most perfect smooth gradients. You want it to look like tattoo flash, especially when it's American traditional style. So there's the black. Now on another layer, I'm using the same use this to paint tool. I got a new layer. I'm gonna start building out the red so that it's on a separate layer from the black without having it affect the other colors. Keep going through, just throwing this down. Great thing is if you go too far, you can erase. Doesn't have to be exact. Grab your smudge, blend out that edge, and that's like a really smooth traditional style highlight. Super cool. Love this. So I went ahead and painted the rest of it. I'm going to show you color by color what this looks like as it's starting to come together. So we have the sketch layer turned off because that's the red line, red pencil kind of looking thing. You want to get rid of that. I threw the red on there. Then I threw some green on the leaves. In the same technique, putting down the ink and then blending the edge. Put some gold, some pink and some purple, some blue in the banner. And I felt like this color scheme was a very Scott Sylvia color scheme, so I wanted to keep it true to the design. Who knows, he might have done it a little different, but I think overall it kind of grasped that feeling. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, I was gonna show you those top layers that make this specific set a lot different than any other spit shading set that you'll see. And that is the paper shadow and paper sheen. If you zoom in on this black area, you can see there's like some texture sitting on top of the ink. And that's something you wouldn't get if you were just working on a photograph of paper or scan of paper. Because of these two top layers, the sheen, when I toggle that off, you see it starts to turn super digital looking. You lose that grain, and then the paper shadow as well. So this looks good, but it looks like it's an iPad. It looks like it was done in Procreate. Having these two top layers make it look like paper. I think it's so awesome that they had that forethought to throw those layers in there. And the setting of these layers, this one is set to linear burn, but you could mess around with them. You could set it to multiply, you could set it to darken, and kind of see what look you wanted. If you want it to be more faded or you want to have more texture, you could use all of these different ones. But as far as how it comes in default, this paper shadow layer is in linear burn. But yeah, lots of options. We go ahead and leave that in linear burn. So as I'm doing this replay, you can see step by step where I'm putting down the ink, then I'm spit shading the edge, and that's just going back and forth between the brush tool and the smudge tool. And it's as easy as it looks. So if you're into wanting to be able to practice Flash or maybe try out different color combinations or a color study for something that you're not too sure about, this is a quick, easy option. You're not going to go through a bunch of paper. You're not going to have to commit to using actual watercolor. And this way you can undo things. You could change colors of layers. If you wanted the green to turn, say, purple, you go to that layer and you bring up the hue saturation sliders, and you can mess around with what color the leaves are. You want them to be more of like an antique olive green, or you wanted to make them purple or blue. Like, you can mess around with this. Personally, I wouldn't use this tool specifically to make Flash to sell or to make prints of, because I feel like the authenticity of actually painting on paper is still something to value. And when it comes to making a final piece of artwork, personally, that's how I like to do it. But I'm going to use this tool a lot to do drafts and to do color studies and to play around with tones and colors and not have to commit. And then once I have a fully rendered final product on the iPad, then I'll use that as reference. And then when it comes time to paint, I know exactly what I'm gonna do. I know exactly how it's gonna be. If you are the kind of person that only likes to use the iPad and use Procreate for your original artwork and you wanna make prints, you're totally allowed to do that. Like, don't think that I'm telling you not to, but I'm just saying personally for me, I'm gonna use this specifically for color studies. But it's a great tool. It's worth every single penny. I would 100% recommend buying it. And if I didn't mention it at the beginning, this video is sponsored by Tattoo Smart. So if you were wondering if they provided me with this set to make a review, they did. So full transparency, there is that partnership I have with them. But this is all really how I feel about it, and I think it's awesome. So if you want to go ahead and head over to tattoosmart.com and download the brush and start playing with it today, you're able to do that. It should be released. Yeah, if you're watching this video, it's out. So go ahead and get that. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It makes a difference, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, peace.